Welcome to REM Reward, the podcast that explores the secrets of sleep and psychology. I'm your host, Ryan, and in each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of sleep and other topics such as mental well-being and personal growth. If you want to unlock your full potential and receive the rewards that come with understanding the power of sleep, you're in the right place. To discover more tips and insights on improving your sleep and overall well-being, visit our website and explore our other episodes at remreward.org. Erik Herzog is a professor of biology at Washington University in St. Louis and the principal investigator of the Herzog Lab. His research focuses on the brain's circadian circuits and how biological clocks regulate behavior, brain function, and disease. Dr. Herzog is also involved with the Hope Center Clocks and Sleep Club, where researchers examine how disruptions to circadian rhythms are linked to conditions such as cancer, neurodegenerative disease, and cognitive decline. His work bridges basic neuroscience and real-world health applications with the goal of understanding how timing in the body influences long-term well-being. This episode is a deep but accessible look at why when things happen in the body can be just as important as what happens. Alrighty, so for my first question, you spent your career studying how our brains keep time. For people who don't know what a circadian rhythm is, how would you explain it in simple terms?
Great. So everybody's comfortable with the idea that they wake up every day, they go to sleep every night. And so they're used to the idea of living a rhythmic lifestyle. And if I asked you, well, what if I took away your alarm clock? What if I took away your mom? What if I took away the light dark cycle and I just put you in a dim cave? It turns out you would still live a rhythmic lifestyle, sleeping and waking on roughly a daily basis. So there's this built-in biological clock system that is there to help us anticipate the challenges of life on Earth. So the differences between day and night, the differences between for us and plants eating during the day and then starving at night. So there's this evolutionary pressure to be ready for what's coming next on a daily basis. And that circadian system has evolved to help you be ready for the challenges of the day.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a really great explanation and makes it so I think a lot of listeners really understand what that is. And I guess why did you get into the science of biological clocks in the first place? Was there a moment or a mentor that sparked your interest?
Yeah, it's a fun question because if I'm really honest, I did get introduced to biological rhythms when I was an undergraduate studying barnacles as they settled onto surfaces. And our research was funded by the Navy to try and figure out ways to prevent barnacles from settling on ships and slowing them down. It turns out the barnacles settle on ships at the high tide
Mm,
and they glue themselves down. And so there was a biological rhythm in that. But it wasn't until probably 10 years later that I learned about circadian rhythms and became interested in them by accident, where I had been studying vision in an organism that likes to cruise around at night
right.
looking for mates. And I discovered that the organism could actually see equally well day and night, so that their circadian clock was changing their visual sensitivity to match the available light. And so you can think of it sort of like when you see those videos of people wearing infrared goggles and the world is green,
Mhm.
this organism sort of turned on a system that jacked up sensitivity so they could still see in relatively dim light.
Wow. What an interesting story and super interesting how you got from barnacles to here, but super cool and thank you for the explanation. Yeah. Um, but then talking about, I guess, teenagers, why do teenagers naturally want to stay up later and sleep in? Is that just bad habits or something biological going on?
We think it's biological and we shouldn't be blaming teenagers for their biology. To be totally honest with you, Ryan, we don't know everything
Hmm.
about why teenagers like to be late birds, but it seems like the first thing that's come out of pretty extensive studies, mostly on undergraduates at Brown University, is that they are more sensitive to light. And so the same light that, I see in the evening has a small effect on my circadian system to tell me to wake up a little bit later on the next day. But you, as a teenager, if you see that same light, it turns out you're more sensitive to it and it actually shifts your clock even more. So you wake up even later
Wow.
than a typical older adult. So that's one big thing that seems to be changing as we develop. So when we're born, we're real early birds, right?
Hmm.
Babies like to wake mom and dad up
Yeah.
early. And then as we age, up until about age 19 and a half for women and about age 21 for males, the average human will get later and later and later in their preferred bedtime and preferred wake up time. And they become late birds. And then the end of adolescence hits and you start to get earlier again. And so for all those teenagers out there that are complaining about, oh my God, I'm so exhausted trying to get to high school in the morning. The good news is that it doesn't get any worse. It's only going to get better.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot of the teenagers and undergrads listening are very glad to hear that. Um, and I guess talking about light, we hear so much about screen time ruining teen sleep. From a science perspective, how much of an impact do devices really have?
Devices can have a really large effect. So there was a wonderful study conducted by researchers where they compared the effect of light from an iPad in the evening. So just reading an iPad for an hour in the evening, if it had its full brightness and the full
Hmm.
color spectrum, it would not only keep the person awake and reading, it would cause them to wake up later the next day. And if you compare that to somebody who's just reading the same text underneath a regular reading lamp, so an incandescent light,
Hmm.
turns out that incandescent light is considerably dimmer and has a lot less blue light in it. And so the teenagers wouldn't wake up so much later from evening reading. So the two
Yeah.
recommendations we make for teenagers who are struggling to get up early in the morning are to put those filters on your computer screen and your phone screen so that the screen looks sort of yellowish
Yeah.
in the evenings, and then as much as possible to avoid early evening light. So light from sundown till midnight, that light is really delaying your biological clock, making you think, oh, sundown, I thought sundown already happened, but I guess this must be sundown. Delay
Yeah.
your biological clock.
Yeah, super interesting. And I think it's a great point you brought up the night mode or kind of that display tip. I think a lot of people do not talk about that. So really great. And I'm really happy you brought that up. And a lot of teens or just people in general, there's a lot of people talking about melatonin gummies to help them fall asleep. I guess what's your view on melatonin supplements for young people or people in general? And are they helpful or risky?
Um, I like to say to people who ask me, should I be taking melatonin? Absolutely. And collect your data and share it with me because you're doing an experiment on your. There's no real evidence that taking melatonin is particularly dangerous, although
Hmm.
it's fun to look at your melatonin bottle and notice the contraindications that are on the bottle. So it will warn you. Many of the bottles will say, don't take this if you're pregnant. Don't take this if you're planning on driving. Those two things make sense to us because melatonin can cross the placental barrier to the baby. And melatonin is a pretty powerful soporific. It can help people fall asleep. It
Right.
lowers your body temperature to help promote sleep. But its effects on synchronizing to local time, for example, for jet lag, and its effects on being a daily supplement to your sleep schedule, I would say is remains controversial because humans are variable.
Right.
You and I are clearly not genetically identical.
Right.
And it turns out you have two melatonin receptors, two kinds of melatonin receptors. And so do I. They're called melatonin receptor 1 and melatonin receptor 2. And they come in different, what we call alleles or flavors.
Hmm.
And depending upon the flavor of your melatonin receptors, you can be particularly sensitive to melatonin or relatively insensitive to melatonin. And certain alleles, certain variants of the melatonin receptor are associated with things like being a late bird, being at risk for obesity, being at risk for diabetes, type 2 diabetes.
Interesting.
And so when people tell me, hey, I want to take melatonin for my trip, what do you think? I say, well, take it 2 hours before you'd like to be asleep, maybe on your new time zone, and write everything down and be a scientist about this
Yeah.
experiment you're running on yourself. And since in the United States you can just buy melatonin, from the supplement section of the grocery store, it's not regulated in any way. You you should figure out, am I taking something that's being helpful or not on your own? We do not regulate it.
Yeah, super interesting, and I think it's a great point to bring up how everyone's so different. And yeah, I've never really thought of it like that. I think trial and error is the greatest way to kind of figure it out on your own. And I really like that you brought up it's a kind of your own experiment, and you're kind of being your own test subject. Super interesting, and thank you for the great explanation. And your lab has studied how circadian rhythms affect things like cancer, arthritis, and even pregnancy. What's the big takeaway that you can give to us?
The big takeaway is that now that we know that we have 20,000 genes, and of those 20,000 genes, we have about a dozen that are dedicated to scheduling your day, your circadian clock genes. And now that we know that those genes are expressed in every single cell in your body, we've started to think about your body as a clock shop. That is
Mm,
a network of cells that are talking to each other about what time they think it is. Everything you can do to keep those cells all in agreement on local time will help promote health.
got it.
And when we experience either genetic or environmental insults to the circadian clock, like things like jet lag, shift work, light at night, dim light during the day, all of these things can lead to not being well synchronized internally so that cells in your heart and cells in your eye, cells in your nose and cells in your skin aren't all perfectly aligned in their
Wow.
circadian rhythms. And the end result is sort of like jet lag. You kind of feel like crap. You have a certain malaise. So we see mood disorders, weight gain, and a variety of other health confounds that are associated with internal desynchrony. So in general, we think of desynchrony as being a problem. And you mentioned our studies on pregnancy. Our idea there is that pregnant moms not only have circadian cells in their own body, but they have circadian cells in their baby, and they need to synchronize the baby to local time to have a healthy pregnancy.
Hmm.
And if that doesn't happen, we think the mom and the baby may be at risk for things like preterm birth.
Wow.
So
That's really amazing.
just like trying to treat high school kids for getting on local time and being able to get to school on time, we think about treating people who may be at risk for circadian disruption.
Wow, that is super interesting. Wow. What a find. Thank you so much for that. And another one of your current projects looks at glioblastoma, a form of brain cancer. How is its growth, how is its growth influenced by the body's clock? And can you explain how that works?
Yeah, I can tell you that this is a relatively new set of studies, and so it needs to be replicated. But what we found last year was that glioblastoma cells, like other cells in our body, have circadian rhythms. And so it turns out that the glioblastoma hijacks the body's circadian rhythms
Oh,
so that it can grow faster and take advantage of things like probably the delivery of nutrients to the tumor so it can grow as fast as it possibly can. And what we found was we could actually block communication from the body clock to the tumor, and that would slow the tumor down.
hmm.
So we are hopeful that we can develop therapies where we actually blind the tumor to body time and the tumor stops growing so quickly. And maybe we can get to a point where this devastating disease can be stopped and maybe even cured.
Wow, super. So it's almost like it has like a mind of its own and it knows what would help it grow the most. That's super interesting. Wow. And you're also working on synthetic gene circuits that sync with circadian time. That sounds super sci-fi, like out of this world. What's the impact of that on future medicine?
Yeah, it is very sci-fi. You're absolutely right. The idea is to make smart cells to deliver drugs to the body at the right time and at the right dose. And since we both agree now that every hormone in your body has a circadian rhythm with a particular time of day when it wants to be released, and it turns out many diseases have peak problems at certain times of the day. For example, in rheumatoid arthritis, there's an increase in inflammation, flares at certain times of day.
Mhm.
And our idea is, well, why don't we get cells to deliver an anti-inflammatory molecule, a drug, at a particular time of day? So we'd like to be able to either inject cells or inject a gene into cells in your joints so that the joints make the anti-inflammatory molecule in anticipation of the daily flares and inflammation.
Got it. So it's almost like putting out the fire right before, or like predicting when the fire would happen and putting it right out at that time.
Yeah, put a little water on the surface to smooth things over.
Got it. Wow. Okay. Super cool. And yeah, it's almost like science, like a sci-fi thing coming to real life. So I'm really happy to hear that. And one more thing, what do you wish parents and teachers better understood about teen sleep and daily rhythms?
So once we all accept that we all have biological clocks and that circadian rhythms in teenagers are fundamentally different than the circadian rhythms in their teachers, once we accept that biology, then we can start to talk about solutions for our society. And
Yeah.
so when we talk with teachers about letting students come to school later, one of the things people will talk about is, well, they're just lazy. High school students are just lazy, and that's not the truth. I mean, it may be true, but it's not because of the reasons that we think of. So our circadian rhythms are real, and they do control things like how well you can pay attention in calculus.
Right.
And so, our Olympic athletes and all of our professional sports teams have totally bought into this. They have circadian coaches who help them think about when's the best time to train, when's the best time to compete. And now that I know when, state championships are going to be happening, how do I train to be at my best at that time of day? And so, given that medicine has started to accept that circadian biology is an important part of treating people, I think we need to accept that that's also going to be true in other settings. Things like thinking about setting school start times,
Hmm.
whether or not we should observe daylight saving time ever again.
Yeah, those are definitely been super, I don't want to say hot topics, but very popular topics at the moment with, I know some states enforcing it on a statewide level and in some counties in certain states. So definitely super interesting. And really excited to see what can come out of that. Then moving on to the last little section I have, it's just some rapid fire questions about you to get the viewers get to know a little bit more about you and your opinions. First question is, are you a morning person or a night owl?
I'm a morning person.
Interesting. And your favorite part of the brain, and I guess why?
So there's a tiny spot in your brain right on top of where your optic nerves go into your brain and cross. That little spot on top of your optic nerves is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, on top of the crossing. And the SCN is sort of the atomic clock of the circadian system. It is coordinating all the other circadian cells in the body.
Amazing. Coffee, tea, or neither?
I like tea. I'm a big black tea drinker. Thank you.
Yes. One thing you do every day to keep your own circadian rhythm in check.
I ride my bicycle to work. I deliberately chose where I live so that I would have a 5.5 mile ride to and from work. So I get some nice natural light at the beginning and end of my day.
That's great exercise as well. Yeah. What's one myth about sleep you wish would disappear forever?
That you're in a coma when you're sleeping.
That's a good one. Biggest surprise you've discovered in your research?
That there's a single population of cells of about 1,500 cells on the left side of the brain, 1,500 cells on the right side of the brain that seem to be master coordinators of daily rhythms and telling us when to wake up and when to go to sleep.
Wow. And my last question, if you weren't a neuroscientist, what would you be doing instead?
Oh, I'd love to be a professional scuba diver.
Wow, amazing. Well, those are all the questions I had for today. Thank you so much for coming on here. I'm sure everyone listening is just as appreciative as I am. I'll make sure to link everything about you below. And thank you again.
My pleasure. Thank you, Ryan. This was fun.
Thank you for tuning into the REM Reward podcast. Before you go, we'd appreciate your support by subscribing, liking, and leaving your thoughts in the comments. Stay tuned for our next podcast, where we will be joined by a special guest speaker to explore even more about the fascinating world of sleep and psychology.